Hello ladies and gentlemen. So in this video I'm going to be talking to you about your specific writing tasks that you have to do in response to the critical anthology. So this is one of the major bits of writing that you have to do this week. We've got a section for rooms set up towards the bottom of the Moodle page. One nice little thing that you might find useful is you have online text of Room now uploaded as a backup. Basically, you should have bought your own copy, but if you ever need to be able to refer to Room and look at an online text, we do have copies of that there for you. The task that we're looking at in this video is in the question answer tasks. Okay, so this is one of these forums where you won't be able to see everybody else's responses and my responses until you've written your own piece of work. So once you've uploaded your answers in here, you will be able to see everyone else's and you'll be able to see my responses and feedback. So hopefully that'll be a useful way of sharing ideas and learning best practice from what other people have said. So this task is here, the Critical Anthology, Section 1, Ideas about Narrative. And one way to think about this task is I'm kind of guiding you through the notes that I'd like you to make and the ideal things that you should be noticing, paying attention to and thinking about. You will be needing to refer to the Critical Anthology in your coursework at some point. So this should be useful work for you, and that's mentioned here. Okay. I'll just make this page fit the screen before we move on. A little bit of adjustment so we can see everything. Okay, I think we're good to go. So you've got a link to the Critical Anthology there if you need it to have a look. You can't answer these questions unless you have read the Critical Anthology, because you won't understand fully what these quotations mean that you're responding to. The quotations from the Critical Anthology are in italics. And then for each of these quotations, I'm asking you a question in response. So you'll be doing this job of copying out all of this material, popping it into your favorite word processor, Word or whatever you're going to use to type up your answers, fill in the answers and then paste it back in. Okay, don't try and type your answers directly into the Moodle forum, otherwise Moodle might time out and you're going to lose your work, which I know happened to Ben. So you want to avoid that scenario. So 1.1 is the first of the 10 extracts about narrative theory, and it's about story types. And this, I think, gives us some useful basic vocabulary about talking about stories and narratives. And most of it will be fairly familiar, but we can start to apply these ideas to Room. So let me just explain what I've got in mind with these questions. Quotation goes: the story will have a hero or a heroine or both. So my question to you is, do you think that the central protagonist of this story is Jack, or is it Ma, or do you think they have equal weight in the narrative? Explain your answer. So that's going to take a couple of sentences. I don't think that there's one compulsory answer or one right answer to that. I think you can see it any of those three ways, but I'd be interested to see why you see it the way you do. Who would you regard as the hero of the story? Or is it basically a double act? And then this extract from the Critical Anthology takes us through the typical structure of narratives. We expect there to be some event or encounter which precipitates the story's action. Precipitates means triggers or causes. And I think this is an interesting thing to reflect on for Room. Because when Room opens, when the story starts, nothing's happening of any consequence, really. I mean, there's quite a lot of activity in the room, and Jack has quite a varied and full experience of things. But it's basically, this is kind of a Groundhog Day scenario. Nothing really changes. One day is more or less the same as the next day. It's kind of a lockdown social distancing experience that Jack and Ma are having. And then Ma decides to change it. So I want you to look back in the story and pin down exactly why is it now that Ma decides that they have to escape. Okay, so what is that trigger? Why doesn't this kind of limbo state continue indefinitely? Once we've got that precipitating trigger, the extract says that there's some of the characters will be on the side of the hero or heroine, while others will be out to oppose them. So if we have Jack or Ma or both as hero or heroine, I don't think it's not worth asking the question who is the villain, because that's old Nick. That's very obvious. So let's ask a more interesting question. Who are Ma and Jack's allies in the book Room? Okay, so the whole of the text, who are the people who you think are on Ma and Jack's side? Try and write me down a complete list of those characters. And then, apart from old Nick, name one other character from the book who Ma feels is a threat. I think there was at least, for me, one character who Ma feels is an oppositional character, who is in opposition to her, who she has a conflict with. So pick one person out. Next idea. The story works to a climax where conflict and uncertainty are at the most extreme. So the climax is at the heart of the book. It's certainly at the heart of this book. What do you think is the climax of Room's narrative? Hopefully that's fairly obvious to you. This crisis point where conflict and uncertainty are at their most extreme. And then after that, we move to conclusion. And there's two sorts of conclusion which are specified or picked out by this extract from the anthology. And it says, stories can either end happily with a sense of liberation, fulfillment and completion, or they can end unhappily in some form of discomfort, frustration or death. In my view, the first of those fits Room better. I do get a sense of liberation, fulfillment and completion at the end of this book. But before that happens, there is a threat. There is a sense that there may be a tragic ending. I just want you to pick out for me, what is that potential tragic event? Where could things have gone tragically wrong between the climax and the conclusion? And then finally, I've said I think liberation, fulfillment and completion does describe the resolution of Room. Do you think that that's a completely accurate description, or are there any of those words that you would quibble with? And to make you think about that and to make you make choices, choose which one of those words best describes the book's ending and give a reason for your answer. So that's going to take a couple of sentences. You can choose liberation, or you can choose fulfillment, or you can choose completion. And you can argue why that's the best word, or I think even better, why haven't you chosen one of the other two? So why aren't those completely appropriate? Why aren't they 100% accurate for this book? So choose the one of those three words that you like the best to describe the end. And then we've dealt with the first of the extracts from the Critical Anthology. The second one talks about the structure of narratives. Now, that's not something that we're going to dwell on particularly. We could have written an essay about that, but I haven't given you a title focused on structure, and therefore I've skipped the next extracts. We haven't looked at beginnings, we haven't looked at endings. We're going to go straight to 1.6. On the other hand, again, I think we can build our vocabulary and use this just to lock in our understanding of the book. So you've got some terms which you have to match up with things from Room. So we have surprise, enigma, suspense, reversal and discovery, and you're going to find examples of each of those. Surprise. What surprised you the most in Room? That's a personal choice. Give me an interesting answer. Enigma is another name for mystery. Enigma signifies really a deep and perhaps even insoluble mystery. So if you can find a mystery that never gets solved, that will be a good choice for your mystery. or a mystery that really matters, or a mystery that really is very obvious to the reader. So try and find me an important mystery in the book. At what point did you feel the most suspense in the narrative? So that would be a sense of frustration or a sense of nervousness. Where do you think the suspense was at its most intense? And then I think this word reversal is a very nice description of what happens in the second half of the book. I want you to go a little bit there beyond noting that Ma and Jack escape, so that they go from being in the room to outside. That's sort of a reversal, but you can be even more specific than that. And I've given you some heavy hints here, I think. Who is imprisoned in the first section of the book? Who is imprisoned in the final section of the book? And I think you can see a switcheroo happens there, a kind of a trading places scenario. And then finally, who embarks on a journey of discovery in the final sections of the book? I think that's very obvious. But then a more interesting question, has the reader discovered anything by the end of the book? So you've got characters on a journey of discovery. What sort of journey of discovery does Donahoe take you on? So that's a harder question, and you might have to ponder that a little bit and think about what, of anything, of any significance have you learned. So it's going to go a little bit beyond just about facts of just information about the story, but have we discovered anything of kind of a greater significance? Then we skip a few of the sections and we move to setting. I haven't asked much about this because we're going to deal with this in more detail next week. But let's make a starting question by asking, what is surprising about the way Jack feels about Room? If this was an omniscient narration, or if this was Ma's narration of Room, I think we'd get a very, very different perception of Room, especially in the first section or before they escape. So think about what's surprising about the way Jack feels about Room, unconventional and perhaps unexpected. When we get to 1.7, we're on to the topic of narrators. Notice that the words narrators here are clickable, and that will take you to our Moodle Critical Terms Glossary. So that's a tool that you can use as you use in Moodle. Whenever you see keywords like that, if you're not sure what they mean, click on them, see what Moodle says. Now, in section 1.7 of Critical Anthology, we start to think about the idea of the unreliable narrator. This is going to be a very key idea for us, and several of your coursework question options are going to deal with this in some detail. The idea of Jack as an unreliable narrator. I have one question for you here. How reliable do you think Jack is as a narrator? And I'm asking this because I don't think he's completely reliable, and I don't think he's completely unreliable. For instance, I think that Jack is a very truthful little boy. He very rarely lies. He's a very honest person. So that adds to his reliability. But what gaps in his understanding and hence his narrative are there? So you can give me specific examples of that. What are the fundamental gaps that occur there? We skip one section, we go to 1.9, which is about characterization, the flat and the round character. I find these quite useful terms, and I think they're quite simple to understand. The flat character is a simple character. They don't have a hidden complexity, they have no depth. Two-dimensional, essentially. So we get this idea of flatness. There's nothing beneath the surface. A round character, on the other hand, is a three-dimensional character. They have layers. There is something going on underneath the surface to varying degrees of depth and complexity. So my challenge to you is here. Put these characters in order from the flattest to the roundest. So this is in a random order at the moment. Jiggle these up. So you start with the flattest character and you move to the most complex and roundest character. We've got old Nick, Ma, the television journalist who interviews Ma, Dr. Clay, and Jack. And then I'll put you on the spot with this second set question. Do you think of old Nick as essentially a flat or a rounded character? Now, really, I think flat and round is kind of two ends of a spectrum, really. So characters are more or less flat or more or less round. It's not really one or another. But if I force you to choose which of those boxes to put old Nick into, which one are you going to go for, flat or round? And if you can say a word or two about why you've chosen that, I'd be quite interested. There might be difference of opinion on that, I think. Our final section is about narrative gaps. There's a lot of overlap, I think, on this with the idea of the unreliable narrator. Okay, but any narrative has got gaps in it. And if you look at section 1.10, it will try and explain why that is. So if you've got a few thousand words in a story, from those few thousand words, you create a whole world or a whole universe in your mind. You see the word house, for instance, and that carries a whole galaxy really of associations and images and connotations, and you form a picture of a house in your mind. Now the writer might then start to describe that house and start to fill in those gaps, or you might have to fill that in yourself. You might simply leave it with the word house, in which case different readers are going to fill those gaps in different ways. So gaps are an absolutely fundamental part of narrative. And it's why when you read a story, the reader and the writer are kind of collaborators. They make the story together. The reader has to bring a lot of the meaning to the story themselves. And they bring that meaning from their experience of the world and their experience of other stories. And they create this understanding, which is richer in many ways than just those marks, those words on the page. You build something to it by bringing your own interpretations and gap filling. So if we apply that to Room, I would like you to go to the first 2 pages of Room and find 2 narrative gaps. So this is a close reading exercise, 2 specific things which are unexplained and may puzzle the reader. Okay, because I think Emma Donohoe is using gaps and narrative gaps very consciously and deliberately, particularly at the beginning of the book. And then if we flip to the end, do you think that there is any significant narrative gap at the end of the book? In other words, do any major parts of the story remain unexplored or unexplained? What questions remain for you as a reader? So we can call that a narrative gap. And then finally, in the art of narrative, less can be more. I think this is a stylish little phrase, and I think it's very true of Room, basically. See if you can give a reason for saying that in Room, less is more in terms of storytelling. Go back into that Critical Anthology extract, have a read of it, and then have a flip through Room and think about how is doing less, how can that be more? And you need to go back to the idea of your narrator as a 5-year-old child, really, who is limited in crucial ways. So why is that limitation an asset to the book in important ways? So that's it. For each of those answers, you need to be writing probably a couple of sentences, I think. Try and give an interesting reason, a precise reason for what you're saying. Upload it onto the forum as a reply, and I'll be giving you feedback on your answers. That's it for now. Thank you very much.